Christians are often challenged that God can't be all-powerful, all-good, and all-loving because people suffer, and there's suffering in the world, and there's evil in the world, and how does a good, all-loving, powerful God allow that? And a common response for Christians is, for moral evils at least, a lot of the evils we see are because of our freely chosen actions, and God gives us free will because his highest priority is love. And that's a response we'll hear a lot, and I want to go through thinking through that response and whether Christians should really rely on that. Hello, welcome to Intermarifica, New Mexico, the channel where we look at questions of wonder from the perspectives of faith and reason, philosophy and theology. I'm your host, Daniel Kelly. Some time ago, I did a video discussing the problem of evil and free will, and whether free will necessarily entails evil. And one of the questions I got from one of our supporters, which you can support us at my locals page, there's a link in the description, and there's all kinds of bonus content there. But one of the things you can get as a local supporter is to ask me questions and to have me make videos on the questions. And one of the questions I was asked by a supporter was, okay, if we can't just say evil is because of free will, how do we make sense of evil and free will? And what we're going to do today is look at the free will part of that equation. That's what we're going to be doing today. So one of the things we're looking at is Christians believe God to be all good, all powerful, and all loving. Well, most Christians. And so if that's all true, why is there suffering? Why is there evil in the world? Because if he's all good, he'd want to get rid of it, and if he's all powerful, he could do whatever he wants to do, right? So there's different ways to solve this problem. Some Christians would just say, and this isn't just unique to Christians, but would just say, well, God's not completely omnipotent. He's not all powerful. He does the best he can. So like Mormon might say that, or some more liberal Christians might say that, but we're going to just assume for the purposes of this video, yeah, God is all those things. We can't deny his goodness or his power or his knowledge or any of those things. We're going to assume all that. We're just going to assume that God's highest priority is love. And the next part is, if God's highest priority is love, well then he needs to give his creatures free will so that they can love, right? Because you can't have love without free will. Again, we could argue about that. There's people who have some clever arguments where you could have love without free will. But again, I think those are the normal common person is going to say, yeah, you need to be able to freely choose love for it to be love. Okay, so with all that, then the next part Christians say is pretty easy. Well, if you've got free will, then there's the possibility of evil and sinning and misusing your free will. And look, that explains evil. And the problem with this answer is too neat. It's a partial explanation, but it's not as complete as some Christians seem to think it is, and I want to help us to think about not relying on it too heavily. And why is this? Because a clever atheist or clever person challenging Christianity will immediately be able to think about, okay, so that means God could do evil if he's completely free. But of course, God can do evil, and actually that's the reason he's completely free, is because he can do evil. And we'll get into that. And another objection they could say is, can you really not imagine a world where you're free to choose whatever you want to choose, but not an evil thing? And if that's not a contradiction in terms, well then God's able to do it. And I think, because I place a very, very high value on God's omnipotence, anything that's not a logical contradiction, that's not clearly a logical contradiction, I believe, yeah, God could do that. So I believe God could have created a world where there's free beings who only have the possibility of choosing between good alternatives. So does that make the argument from free will fall apart? Yes and no. Let's look at it. So I think you could have a scale of freedom. Okay, you could have the highest, unlimited freedom, which would be God. God is unlimited in his freedom. That's why he can't sin. That's why he can't choose evil, because to choose evil and to choose sin is to limit your freedom. It enslaves you. Sin and evil enslaves you and is a limitation on your freedom. So God, being unlimited, he cannot choose evil. He can't do evil. So that's no limit on him. That's the fullest expression of freedom is not being able to choose evil. So, okay, that's for an infinite creature, a creature that's not, not creature, a being, or being itself that is infinite, doesn't have any limitations. Maybe it could be that to have finite creatures with free will, there has to be the possibility of evil. You could take that next step. But, well, we know that that's not true either, because there's the first of all, the saints in heaven. They're completely free. They're finite creatures, and they will not choose evil. So, yeah, and there's even been one who never had the possibility of choosing evil. Mary. She never was going to choose evil. She was never going to do a sinful thing. And there's important reasons for that in theology, which we could get into later. So it would seem that there's a range of possibilities for a finite, free creature. There's the saints and the Blessed Virgin Mary, who are totally free and cannot choose evil. Then there's us now, who are free, or the angels when they made their decision. They're free, but we can harm our freedom by misusing it and falling into things that limit our freedom. Evil. That's what evil does, is limit our freedom. But then there's the possibility of either this possible world, this imaginary world where God could have created beings that could just choose between good things, and they're free but they can't sin. And we know that is a possibility because there are beings that are free beings but cannot choose evil. We know of them. They're called children. Children cannot commit a mortal sin. They can't, before the age of reason, they can't sin at all, but they're still a free type of being. And we could argue that a little bit back and forth, but I think it's pretty clear that, yeah, so there's these levels of freedom. And you might think, well, that seems kind of weird and arbitrary, and you're just forcing things to fit your theology or preconceived notions. But I actually think it's the most natural thing in all the world. There's all sorts of examples in our world of things that are on this grade where at the lowest end of freedom, so like a child, the lowest end of an ability, like a child, they don't have the possibility of messing up this egregious way. Then with a medium amount of this ability, yeah, you can mess up these egregious way. And then if you maximally have this ability, then you can't mess up again, just like the child couldn't. So what do I mean? I'll give some analogies. The first thing is, I've worked construction since I was very, very young, and we do different hard labor and stuff. And one thing I didn't usually do, but sometimes I had help with, was the plumbing parts of construction. And I'd seen a lot of do-it-yourself plumbing that people had done, and professional plumbing I'd seen that people have done, and all different kinds of plumbing. And so for threaded pipes, when you get those pipe wrenches and you're tying them together, somebody who's really, really bad and not skilled and not strong enough, they can't strip. They're not going to be able to strip the threads in the same way because they're just not strong enough. They, like a child cannot strip it, can't, because you're using these brass couplings. Brass is kind of soft. They're not going to be able to. But then you get this DIYer, right, or this medium skilled person. They're strong enough to do it. They don't really have the skills, don't really know. Yeah, they can bend the pipe, they can malform it, they can strip those threads. But then a master plumber, he's not going to be doing that. So see, there's all sorts of examples like that. Another example I would use would be I grew up doing, for my mother was Hindu, and we did a lot of yoga and stuff. And one thing I find is in the lotus position, a lot of people who start yoga can't even get into it, right? So there's no possibility of them getting stuck in that position, right? And again, for masters or people who have done it their whole lives, like I've done it my whole life, it's very natural to me to do. You're not going to get stuck in that position. But then I've seen a lot of medium people who have been doing yoga for a while, and I'm not commenting on the morality of doing yoga or not. I would do a different video on that. I'll just as an aside say, yeah, there are problematic elements that I think Christians and Catholics should be aware of, but on the other hand, it is silly to think that you could accidentally worship pagan deities. You cannot accidentally worship things, but that's a different video. So if you're medium, you could get stuck in that position. I've seen people, they're tying their legs together and they get stuck and they don't know how to get out. When a beginner can't do that because they can't even get in the position, and someone who's done a lot can't do it because they've done a lot. So that's like freedom. That's like the scale of freedom that we have in our lives. A child or this imaginary world where there's only good things, which I think would be on the level of children, they can't sin. And then the saints and stuff who have progressed to this high level part, they can't sin. But we in the middle, we have enough freedom, so unlike a child, we can sin, but we haven't grown to the point where we're not going to sin anymore. And you could ask, though, well, why doesn't God just create us like the Virgin Mary, or at the level of the saints? That doesn't really seem fair, that he could just skip a lot of this. And the first thing I'm going to say is we need to be a little bit skeptical of our own ability to know what God would or wouldn't do, or what's best for God to do. Let's say somebody gave you $1 million and said, hey, if you use this well and you're good with taking care of this $1 million, I'll give you $1 billion. And you know, you have every opportunity to use the $1 million well and get that $1 billion. What kind of person would we be to say, man, that guy kind of sucks? Why didn't he just give me $1 billion right away? What would we call a person like that? Well, we'd call that person ungrateful. And like, wow, this guy gave you all this stuff he didn't have to give you. You're just like, oh, what a jerk that he didn't give me even more. And that's kind of like what we often fall into with our freedom, or the abilities that God does give us, or the limitations he places on us. We know that Christians know, if you're living a Christian life and stuff, that God's trustworthy. We know he's doing good stuff, and that's the ultimate answer to the problem of evil, is that God is trustworthy. You look at his works and his deeds, and he's trustworthy. So he must have a good reason for allowing suffering and stuff, right? But we know he's given us all this good stuff. The amount of freedom that he's given us is like $1 million. And we also know he's promised to give us this full freedom that's not limited by the possibility of sinning if we use our freedom now well. So it's kind of, it doesn't really make sense to complain. It's kind of ungrateful because it's a free gift. So the last thing I want to leave you with, I've done videos on the problem of evil and on free will before, and I'll put links to those in the description. But this is a good, neat explanation where you say, oh, free will, you need free will to love, and that's why there's evil. But don't rely on it too heavily. And I find that God himself in the scriptures, when he's when the problem of suffering and evil comes up, this is not, he doesn't ever respond with this explanation. It's too neat, it's too tidy. What he responds with is a call to what we do know about him, and just a call of skepticism of our own ability to know his plans. So I think that the Job's way is sometimes a very helpful way to look at this problem of evil. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. You have a very good day, and God bless you.